Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is mindset, and the title is Clearer Communication. So, what I thought was funny about this, there was a life moment that brought up the idea for today's podcast. And what it was I was spending time with two people, okay? And I was nearby, but not part of the conversation. And someone asked another person for their opinion on something. They wanted to kind of get their opinion, maybe voice, get some ideas, maybe see someone's reaction on what they were thinking. But what they actually said was, I want your opinion, but I don't care what the answer is. So I thought that was hysterical because I have an idea of what they meant, which would have been, I would like your opinion and I'd like you to be honest. So don't feel like you have to kind of, lie or shy away from the truth. Just tell me whatever their honest opinion is, and I won't be offended. But what they said was, I want your opinion, but I don't care what the answer is. Meaning that it's like, I just thought that was so awesome. I want your opinion. I want you to tell me your thoughts, but I don't really care. So that's definitely not what they meant, but that was what it sounded like, and it just made me die laughing. And it brought to mind the fact that often when we communicate with others, there can be misunderstandings, there can be lack of clarity in what we say that can sometimes cause issues. It can either get people into like arguments or disagreements, or just have like a misunderstanding and something gets confused. Maybe even having like silent resentment. Somebody kind of gets offended, but they don't say something at that time, and then it just kind of snowballs into the next thing. Then all of a sudden, everything that other person says, whether it's good or bad, they're hypersensitive to it, and the relationship, the connection between the two people just goes south. And I thought it'd be kind of neat to discuss some common ways in which people kind of mess up communication, and when you're the one speaking in, when you're the one listening, and just give some kind of ideas and thoughts and maybe some things people can kind of practice in their everyday life. So, when we start with that phrase, I want your opinion, but I don't care what the answer is, what they really meant, like I said, was they wanted their honest answer. They wanted their honest opinion. And in that moment, I'm sure the person didn't recognize the way that in which I could have taken, like the way I took that statement. They would have meant it the way they meant it. But the exact words they said did not mean what they meant to mean. So there's a separation sometimes between what we mean to say and what the meaning of what we say is. And our job with communication to other people is to get a better job of picking the exact words that we mean with the meaning that we mean without having to then explain what we meant afterwards. Okay? So another common phrase you'll hear when we're the ones speaking, and that's what we're looking for, is how to improve that part of it. We'll get to the listening in a second here. But when we're the ones speaking, you'll sometimes hear someone say, well, what I meant was. So they'll say something. The person they're talking to responds differently than what they expected. And usually often it's not in a good way. Okay? So if they respond in a positive way, we very rarely have to explain what we meant. So more so it's like when somebody responds negatively and we're like, oh crap. So, well, what I meant to say was, and then we try to explain it. And what I guess I would like to bring up in the podcast is that idea of trying to be clearer with what you say the first time. So if there's a simpler way to say something, say it the simpler way. You need to also just consider every single word that you use, and does that word mean what I want it to mean? Now, I do not do a great job in these podcasts all the time of saying the exact word that I mean. It's something I'm trying to improve on in my life, and I'm sure everybody can work on improving it. And there was actually a book I read, 12 Rules of Life, by a guy named Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson is a psychologist from Canada, and he's also a teacher. So he had gotten into some hot water about some kind of freedom of speech rights. And he had been on some interviews. And in one of the interviews I listened to recently, he mentioned that years ago, he started the practice of analyzing every single word that he said. And did each word mean what he wanted it to mean? So was he speaking with kind of generalities? Was he speaking with common terminology? Was he speaking kind of loosely? Or was he actually deliberately picking each word that he was saying? And he said he started trying to do that better because due to the hot water, and it caused some publicity for him, and he would get interviews. And then he'd often find that in interviews, people would use his own words against him. So he found that in order for him to reduce that occurrence of happening, he had to better choose his words. So that way, if somebody were to take the words out of context, the words were so damn accurate that you still couldn't even twist it into a different way. So I thought that was awesome, and I've played around with that at different times in my life of trying to be more clear and precise with my language. But that actually does, at least for me, it takes a lot of mental effort. And sometimes I'll just kind of get tired. So I'll just be tired for the day and say, screw it, whatever I say is whatever I say. But the more often I try to practice it in, bursts or small bits, I do get better and better at it. So obviously with personal training, since that's my job, when I talk with clients, I want to be as precise as I can be. So that's typically when I practice it the most, is when I'm talking with clients. So that way the precision of my language isn't an issue when trying to clarify, technical terms and lifts, or like positional cues, maybe even the structure of the workout if I'm trying to explain what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it's very important when I'm talking with clients that I have as precise language as possible. But then also I just like to have that as a general thing that I do in my life. So with that in mind, the concept of being very precise with our language and word selection, that's what I would like to bring up, in the sense that when you're the one speaking, if you feel that you often have to say, well, what I meant was, or you often have to further explain something after the fact, then you might want to look more in depth and kind of like more focused on what you actually say in the first place. Okay? So put a little mental effort into thinking ahead of what you say. Now, when you do this to an extreme, it can become almost debilitating because you won't want to say anything, because things can be taken in so many ways. So, you can predict what you'll want it to mean, and somebody can twist it against you. Now, that can happen, absolutely, even when you're trying to be as precise as possible. But why not try to be a little more precise than not trying at all, so that way you reduce the likelihood of things being misconstrued. So when you talk to somebody who loves you, a friend or a family member, something like that, they're often not looking to try to twist what you say. But it's still important to try to be clear with our communication with those people, because we love them the most. And we wouldn't want there to be misconceptions or misunderstandings of what we meant, and maybe some silent resentment. So this is something that I think happens more than people would recognize, is there are people who will tell you when they initially get annoyed with something you say. But then there's a lot of times where people will kind of go along with what you say, but it kind of rubs them the wrong way. They don't say anything, and then those moments add up more and more over time, and then you kind of lose the quality of the relationship or quality of the connection. You don't talk as much, or maybe you find that person to be more and more annoying because there's all this background annoyance and kind of emotional strain from previous moments that were never clarified. So the more precise we can pick our language, the better we can get across what we mean to say the very first time we say it. So if there's a simpler way to say something, say it that way. If there's more precise language, take the mental effort, take the second or two to rethink what you're thinking of saying, okay, and see if you can find a more precise way of saying it. So when you're the one speaking, just take a second or two and say, if I say these words, what will they hear? that's a good approach when you're the one speaking, is to think, what would I like hear if I heard this said to me? So what would I interpret this as? What would be my takeaway emotion or feeling or message? And just giving that a little bit of thought is a good practice. If you feel yourself starting to get kind of exhausted, or if you feel yourself starting to kind of be limited and not wanting to be social because you almost take it too extreme, then relax and only use it at parts of the day. So, but it's definitely something that's good to practice, is thinking through what you say before you say it. So will you have to explain this? Or are you saying what you mean to say the first time? Okay? Now, when you're the one listening, there's a lot of what people do wrong when they're listening that can actually improve communication. So, whenever somebody's telling you a story, and sometimes they'll be maybe just venting for their day, and they're just kind of clearing some emotions. They're trying to organize their thoughts. They just want to have something to talk to, and you were the thing. Okay, so whether it's their dog or a cat or a pet, whether it's just screaming at the windshield on the drive home from work, okay, so or whether it's you, when somebody's venting to clear their emotions and they just want to kind of speak through their thoughts to get them more organized, it's important that we recognize what our role is in that moment. Our role is to be a sounding board. We maybe can kind of reflect on what they say, just wording it back to them in a different way. Just help kind of, in a sense, be the thing that they can bounce their voice off of. What you really, absolutely, really need to work on avoiding is giving advice on how to correct an issue when no one asked you for your advice. So somebody will vent about something to you. And often you'll hear somebody say, you know what you should do? Automatically stop talking if that's what you say. If they didn't ask for your advice, they don't want it. So if you say you know what you should do, 99.9% of the time, whatever you say after that, the person doesn't care. They didn't ask. They don't want to know. So you only want to give advice when your advice is asked for. You only want to try to solve the problem when the person asks you to help them solve the problem. They are not talking to you to find out what you know. They are not talking to you to find out your advice. They are not talking to you to solve the problem. They are talking to you to clear their emotions and organize their thoughts. So you need to be aware of what your role is. Your role is not to tell them what they should do. Your role is not to give advice. Your role is to not solve the problem unless they've clearly asked you to do so. Okay? So again, when somebody tells you a story, maybe about something that happened in the past, so maybe it's an old story, not even just venting of today, but they're talking about something that happened a couple months ago, a year ago, or multiple years ago. And if you have the urge to respond, well, I'd have done da-da-da-da-da, again, shut up. Stop talking. Okay? They're telling the story for recognition or validation of their feelings. They're wanting to see if you respond the way they responded to the story. They don't want to know what you'd have done then, because then has already passed. The moment has passed. They don't need to know what you'd have done because they can't do it even anyhow. So you're giving them advice that is absolutely stupid because they can't even use it. And you would say, well, what happens if the moment comes up again? Then they'll know. They never asked for your advice. If somebody doesn't ask for your advice, they don't want it. Again, you're not there to solve problems. You're not there to offer advice. When somebody's telling you an old story, they're telling you because they want recognition and validation of their feelings. They just want someone to understand what they felt and kind of be in shock with them. So if it was an old story and they're like, yeah, can you believe somebody would do that? You should say, yeah, I can't believe that. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. That's all your answer is. So if they say, yeah, can you believe somebody would do that? They don't want to hear, Well, you know what I'd have done? I'd have done da da da. No one gives a shit. By the time you finish, you know what I'd have done? They've stopped listening already. Okay? So, again, recognize what your role is when you're a listener. You are to listen, not to speak. You are there to let them clear their emotions, organize their thoughts. You're there to give recognition and validation of their feelings. That's what your job is as a listener. Okay? So, a client of mine recently showed me a video which I thought was freaking hilarious and I loved it. And the title, I think it was like a YouTube video or something, so you could probably look this up. And the title is It's Not About the Nail. Okay? And oh my God, it was awesome. So, there is a woman talking to her husband. And by the way, women are problem solvers too. So, don't just be picking on the men that they're problem solvers. Women are problem solvers too. Okay? But there was a woman talking to, I guess it was like a wife and a husband. And the wife had a nail sticking out of her forehead. So obviously this is like, fake, but that's essentially what they had going on. And she was just talking about how she just had this headache. She felt this pressure in her head, and she just didn't like the way she felt. She didn't feel comfortable. So when she was telling her husband, she's like, oh man, I just got this, this headache. And the husband's looking at her, he's like, well, you know you got a nail in your head. And she goes, it's not about the nail. I just have this pressure in my head and I'm just kind of so uncomfortable. Nothing just feels good right now. And he's like, there's a freaking nail in your head. And she continued to say, it's not about the nail. And that's exactly freaking wonderful, great advice. Okay? Is when somebody's telling you about the quote unquote nails in their life, it's not about the nail. They're not asking you to solve their problems. They're not asking you for your advice. Okay? Unless they specifically did, which most of the time they don't. Okay? So, are you listening to solve the problem? Or are you listening to be a sounding board? What they want is the sounding board. To clear emotions, to organize thoughts, to have recognition and validation of feelings. They just want someone to understand them. They don't want you to solve the problem. They don't want to talk about the nail. It's not the nail. Okay? So when somebody tells you, oh, I have a splitting headache, and they have a nail in their head, don't point out the nail. Just say, man, that stinks. Headaches suck. Ugh. I hope you can get over that quickly. I hope it goes away for you. Don't tell them to take ibuprofen. They know ibuprofen exists. Okay? Don't ask them when the last time they ate was. They know they need food. Don't solve the problem. Just listen. That's it. Okay? So when you listen, ask yourself, am I listening right now to understand? Or am I listening to solve the problem? Your job is to listen to understand. Okay? Also, when somebody's telling a story or when they're talking about their day, when they're complaining about things, okay, or venting, which most people would rather call it venting than complaining, but it's pretty much the same thing. The listener, are you listening to understand them, or are you just trying to compare a story? So how annoying is that? We all know. Whenever you come home and you're like, oh my gosh, I had a horrible day. Like my coworker was just a total jerk today. They were talking so loud on their phone I could barely think. Yeah, well, I had a coworker do da 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 da. It's like, oh my God, you didn't even hear me. You didn't even hear me. So as soon as the words left my mouth, there was no recognition. There was no understanding. You just spoke to compare. That's not what the person wants. Okay? So are you listening with a me mindset? Or are you listening with a them mindset? Are you listening based on what would be the best response, what would be the best action, what would be the best thing for me to do for them? Or are you listening to compare what happened in your life? Are you listening to and then thinking of the advice that you would want to give? Are you listening and thinking of how you would solve the problem? It's not about you, okay? Don't listen with a me mindset. Listen with a them mindset. Now, the same thing when you're speaking, okay? Are you speaking to connect with people, or are you speaking to compare? Again, are you speaking with a mindset of including the other person, like a them mindset. So will they understand what I'm trying to say? Am I saying my message in a way in which they'll recognize the intent of these words? So are you speaking with them in mind? Or are you just speaking for yourself? So this is very important when we talk about the idea of communication, is to give what you'd like to get. So it comes back to the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have done unto you. But it's give what you'd like to get. Okay? So when you're the listener, give the type of listening that you would want someone to give to you when you're talking. When you're speaking, give the type of speaking that you would like someone to give whenever they spoke to you. So if you're asking somebody to do something, don't treat them like they're a moron. Okay? First of all, ask. Don't tell. That's a huge thing. So when you get home, and maybe you need help with something, don't just say, hey, I need you to do da-da-da-da-da-da. That's not fun. That's not how you'd want to be talked to. They'd say, hey, if you don't mind, could you da-da-da-da-da-da. It's a lot different than, I need you to da-da-da-da-da. Okay? So think about it. Give what you'd like to get. When you listen to other people, do you listen in a way that you'd want them to listen to you? When you speak to other people, do you speak to them in a way that you'd want them to speak to you? If they spoke to you how you speak to them, would there be love? Would there be clear communication? Would there be compassion, understanding, friendliness? What emotions would be evoked if they spoke to you how you speak to them? If they listened to you how you listen to them? So when it comes to communication, you have to give what you'd like to get. Okay? And just because you're a great listener doesn't mean you never get your chance to talk. So sometimes people are afraid to be a great listener because they feel like they're just going to be a stepping stone, or they're never going to have their turn to talk. They're never going to have their emotional needs met. And that's not true. Okay? Absolutely not true. You just have to know when it's your time for your topics. Okay? So to be a great listener doesn't mean you never get to talk. It just means you wait for when it's the right time for your turn. So when someone's talking about their stuff, don't try to compare. Don't try to butt your stuff into their stuff. Let them have their moment. Let them have their understanding. Let them clear their emotions. Let them organize their thoughts. Let them get recognition and validation for their feelings. Okay? Be their sounding board. And then, when the time is right, they will do the same for you. Okay? Give what you'd like to give. Cool. So hopefully this gave you some ideas, some insight into maybe some thought processes in which we can make our communication clear and kind of avoid misunderstandings, avoid hurt feelings, and all those kind of negatives that can come with communication. Okay? Cool. So if you have any questions about communication in any way whatsoever, I don't really know what questions there might be, okay? But if there are, email us at brutalironjim@gmail.com. So I love getting feedback from listeners. I truly, genuinely, sincerely appreciate it because it just makes me excited to know people are actually listening and finding any value in this stuff. So thank you very much when you guys send emails or messages on social media, anything like that. I really, truly appreciate it. Okay? So if you need anything from us, you can always email us at brutalironjim@gmail.com. So if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. So if you'd like to improve the communication with someone, maybe this would be a good thing to kind of drop a hint out there, okay, on social media, email, text, whatever. But if you think this might be helpful, go ahead and please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutalironjim@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.